Realizing well being of Buddha's teaching. When we have a toothache, we know that not having a toothache is happiness. But later, when we don't have a toothache, we don't treasure our non toothache. Practicing mindfulness help us learn to appreciate the well being that is already there. With mindfulness, we treasure our happiness and can make it last longer. I always ask psychotherapists, why do you only talk to your clients about suffering? Why not help them touch the seeds of happiness that are also there? Psychotherapists need to help their patients be in touch with them with the third noble truth, the cessation of suffering. I encourage them to practice walking meditation and tea meditation with their patients in order to water the seeds of joy in them. Please ask yourself, what nourishes joy in me? What nourishes joy in others? Do I nourish joy in myself and others enough? These are questions about third noble truth, the cessation of suffering. Well being is available if you know how to enjoy the precious jewels you already have. You have eyes that can see, lungs that can breathe, legs that can walk, and lips that can smile. When you are suffering, look deeply at your situation and find the conditions for happiness that are already there, already available. When we begin the first stage of the third noble truth, we already have some happiness, but we are not exactly aware of it. We are free, but we don't know that we are free. When we are young, we are strong and healthy, but we don't appreciate it. Even if someone tries to tell us, we cannot realize what we have. Only when we have difficulty walking do we realize how wonderful it was to have healthy legs. The first turning of the third noble truth is the recognition of the possibility of the options of suffering and the presence of peace. If we do not have peace and joy at this moment, we can at least remember some peace and joy we experienced in the past or observe the peace and joy of others. We see that well being is possible. The second turning is to encourage ourselves to find peace and joy. If you want to garden, you have to bend down and touch the soil. Gardening is a practice, not an idea. To practice the fourth noble truth, the four noble truths, you yourself have to touch deeply the things that bring you peace and joy. When you do, you realize that walking on the earth is miracle. Washing the dishes is a miracle, and practicing with a community of friends is a miracle. The greatest miracle is to be alive. We can put an end to your suffering just by realizing that our suffering is not worth suffering for. How many people kill themselves because of rage or despair? In that moment, they do not see the vast happiness that is available. Mindfulness puts an end to such a limited perspective. The Buddha faced his own suffering directly and discovered the path of liberation. Don't run away from things that are unpleasant in order to embrace things that are pleasant. Put your hands in the earth, face the difficulties, and grow new happiness. In the second turning, we encourage ourselves to practice this path. This is realized by learning, reflecting, and practicing. As we learn, whether by reading, listening, or discussing, we need to be open so we can see ways to put what we learned into practice. If learning is not followed by reflecting and practicing, it is not true learning. In this stage, we see that the path has everything to do with our real difficulties in life. A practice that does not concern our real suffering is not a path we need. Many people are awakened during a difficult period in their lives when they see that living irresponsibly has been the cause of their suffering, and that by transforming their lifestyle they can bring an end to their suffering. Transformation is gradual, but once we see clearly the causes of our suffering, we can make the effort to change our behavior and bring our suffering to an end. If we are aware that our heart is not working well, and that alcohol, cigarettes, and cholesterol are causes for this, we try to stop ingesting these things. In the second stage of the path, there is an increase in freedom every day. The path becomes real as we put into practice that we have learned. The Buddha advised us to identify the kinds of nutriments that have been feeding our pain and then simply to stop in ingesting them. We do our best and we ask our brothers and sisters to help us. My depression, my fear, what does this have to do with my real suffering? My depression, fear, anger, if it does not have anything to do with these real problems, it may not be a path you need. It may be just an escape. Practice your kung and in a way that your suffering is transformed. This is suffering. This suffering needs to be seen clearly. The roots of this suffering need to be clearly understood. I have seen this suffering. I have seen how it manifests. I have seen its content and its roots. These are practices, not mere proclamations. Understanding things as they are, yatha bhuta jnana, emerges from our life and our practice. It is important to understand the interbeing nature of the Four Noble Truths. When we look deeply into one of the four truths, we see the other three. When we look deeply into the truth of suffering, we see how that suffering came to be. We need suffering in order to see the path, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path leading to the cessation of suffering are all found in the heart of suffering. If we are afraid to touch our suffering, we will not be able to realize the path of peace, joy, and liberation. Let us reframe the Four Noble Truths. Cessation, the third noble truth, means the absence of suffering, which is the presence of well being. Instead of saying cessation, we can simply say well being. If you do that, we can call the fourth noble truth the noble eightfold path that leads to well being. Then, instead of just calling the second noble truth the origin of suffering, we can say that there is an ignoble eightfold path that leads to suffering, the a path of eight wrong practices: wrong view, wrong thinking, wrong speech, wrong action, wrong livelihood, wrong diligence, wrong mindfulness, and wrong concentration. We might like to renumber the Four Noble Truths as follows for the benefit of the people of our time. Well being, traditionally number 3, cessation of suffering. Noble Eightfold Path that leads to well being, traditionally number 4. Suffering, traditionally number 1. And ignoble Eightfold path that leads to suffering. Traditionally, number two, arising of suffering. If we live according to the noble eightfold path, we cultivate well being and our life will be filled with joy, ease, and wonder. If but if our path is not noble, if there is craving, hatred, ignorance, and fear in the way we live our daily life, if you practice the ignoble eightfold path, suffering will naturally be the outcome. The practice is to face our suffering and transform in order to bring about well being. We need to study the Noble Eightfold Path and learn ways to put it into practice in our daily lives.